Considered on their own terms, the Blue Note records are difficult to fault, being among the best of Monk's career. Fresh and hungry for recognition, he was finally able to commit to the medium of records his own new music without compromise, and with a group of musicians trained by him personally. His efforts, however, went largely unnoticed. In the annual Readers' Poll of 1948, conducted by the jazz journal Downbeat, Monk received a grand total of 23 votes for Best Jazz Pianist. At the beginning of the same year, he had a prolonged guest spot at Minton's with the musicians who were already on Blue Note. He also played a concert at New York's famous Town Hall. But the opportunities he had to appear in his native city were becoming fewer and fewer. In August, he was found in possession of marijuana and spent 30 days in jail. He also lost his cabaret card for a year. Without it, he could not appear in clubs where alcohol was served. In March of 1949, Monk reluctantly performed outside New York City in Chicago's Hotel Pershing, and with no great success. On August 31st of that year, he was on hand for the opening of the legendary jazz club Birdland. Typically, he ignored the nervous request of the owner, Oscar Goodstein, to please not put his glass on top of the brand new piano and not rest his burning cigarette on the keys. Monk made fun of these admonitions, which shows how difficult he could be, but also shows, incidentally, how he conceived of the piano as a workspace of instrument in the true sense, to be subjected to his will and needs, and no one had better cross him in the process. During another gig, he suddenly disappeared under the piano and tore at the pedal bracket because the rods connected to the pedals were not working properly. None of these things were calculated to make managers enthusiastic about hiring him. The Readers' Poll in Downbeat that year reflects his commercial nadir in no uncertain terms. He did not get a single vote. Monk's popularity, if one can speak of such a thing, did not decline in isolation. The music with which he was generally identified was headed the same way. For the young members of the straight-laced middle-class cool jazz or West Coast jazz, regarded by many as a white version of bebop, or the New Orleans revival, were the genres of music they now identified with. Genuine bebop became increasingly marginalized. As art music, it did not command a large following, even in the African-American community, where youth identified with rhythm and blues coming from such labels as Motown, founded in Detroit in 1949. Outwardly, Monk did not allow himself to appear embittered. He holed up in his apartment playing the piano for even longer stretches of time or just listened to records. His wife tried to shield him from all unpleasantness, and with various domestic jobs, she contrived to keep the household together. With the arrival of 1950 came new cares and prospects. On December 27, 1949, his son, Thelonious Jr., was born. He was soon known within the family as Tootie, after the Disney comic character Little Tootie the Tugboat, which Thelonious Jr. could imitate before he could talk. In the new year, Norman Granz, organizer of the Jazz at the Philharmonic series, engaged Monk for an all-star recording for which he again brought together Charlie Parker and Dizzy Gillespie for his own Clef Litter Verve label. Bassist Curly Russell and star drummer Buddy Rich completed the group. But the following year, a disastrous incident occurred that put an end to Monk's live performance career in New York for 6 years. Together with his friend Bud Powell, now addicted to drugs, and other acquaintances, he was stopped by the New York police for a vehicle inspection. Powell shoved him a heroin packet to be stowed in the front seat or thrown out the window. Monk was caught holding the packet. While the other passengers got off lightly, Monk had to spend 60 days behind bars because he refused to implicate his friends. When Nellie reproached him for this, he would only say cryptically, "I be able to walk the streets when I get out. Worse even than determined custody was the loss of his city police work permit or cabaret card. This time for a long period because it was his second offense. Not until 1957, after intensive efforts and with the help of influential friends, would Monk again appear on the stage of a New York jazz club. In May 1952, Monk led a band into the studio for the last time with Blue Note. We might just note here a curiosity of his recording routine. At home, he would play through his compositions for hours at a time in the company of his musician friends, but he steadfastly refused to prepare them for recording sessions. They came into the studio and had to interpret the selections fresh without even knowing beforehand what they were about to play. Often he would not hand out music, preferring that the participants learn the music by ear, which he felt required a more profound level of familiarity. He was opposed to recording second takes, much less third ones. He believed that with every additional take, the essential mood of the piece was diminished. When asked in an interview with Downbeat, what do you prefer, recording live or in a studio, he answered, I guess live is better. You have to do it all at one time. Do it the first time, and it's usually best. If you record it over and over again, it's generally a waste of time. This chapter is called The Prestige Years, Turning Points. The Prestige label, for which Bob Weinstock and critic Ira Kitler produced, had a philosophy similar to Blue Note's in that recording sessions tended to have the character of jam sessions instead of heavily prepared productions with elaborate arrangements. One important difference was that Blue Note often allowed the musicians a day to meet in the studio and rehearse. At Prestige, on the other hand, even this extra expense was avoided. This hardly conflicted with Monk's own attitude toward recording, however. Blue Note, moreover, paid by check, whereas Prestige was known to pay musicians cash in hand immediately following the sessions. This made them especially popular with musicians who were addicted to drugs, and that meant just about all the leading innovators of the time. When Monk's contract with Blue Note expired in 1952 and an offer was made by Prestige, Monk did not hesitate to accept it. Blue Note, for their part, did nothing to try and stop him. Prestige had the new star of jazz, Miles Davis, under contract, and the modern jazz quartet would soon follow. In these professional circumstances, the less well-known Thelonious Monk, with his reputation for eccentricity, was treated with a certain coolness, especially by Bob Weinstock. The best piano was not at his disposal. The instrument that he plays on his second recording session is clearly out of tune. In his 2 years at Prestige, he spent a grand total of 5 days in the studio as a leader. He was employed as a sideman in the studio for only 2. One was with Sonny Rollins, an ardent participant in Monk's house seminars. The other was Christmas Eve in 1954, and was fortunately the occasion of the legendary recording of Bag's Groove with the all-star band under Miles Davis. Monk had as much time as he liked to indulge the strange rhythms of his life, playing the piano for hours at a stretch, listening to records, sleeping, or playing with his son. A welcome change was provided by the all-star jam session that took place Sunday afternoon at Bob Reisner's Open Door. Bebop greats like Charlie Mingus, Roy Haynes, and Charlie Parker sat in. Unfortunately, these gatherings are documented only in photos, not on record. Monk's house seminars played an important role in this period of reduced professional activity. New regulars included the pianist Elmo, Hope, and Herbie Nichols. At the end of 1953, the French pianist Henri Renaud came to New York and stayed with George Wallington. Soon he too was one of Monk's house seminarians. He reports how, while there, he tried to work out difficult passages from Monk's 10-inch Prestige LPs. sat on the same piano bench and learned Monk's compositions the same way. From time to time, Henri Renaud would accompany Monk to Tony's Cafe in Brooklyn. There, without altering his distinctive style, but still with complete success, Monk played dance music for young couples. He was sometimes accompanied on these outings by Sonny Rollins. Despite such occasional gigs, Monk's financial situation was seriously strained. While out on his strolls, he would stoop to pick up empty bottles in order to redeem the deposit. In 1954, his mother died. For nearly 4 decades, she had been the most important person in his life. Monk felt he had not realized the expectations implicit in his mother's devotion. One can imagine how depressed this must have made him. His enforced separation from his family during his relatively brief jail term had already done him psychological damage. Now it became more and more evident how seemingly helpless he was with respect to the everyday details of life. Unable to perform at jazz clubs and with sales of his records languishing, he had to wrestle with feelings of failure. He was particularly anxious about providing for his young family. That anxiety heightened when his daughter was born on September 5th, 1953. She was named Barbara after her mother, but was called Boo Boo by Monk. He had an especially close relationship with her. Thelonious Jr. speaks of an unspoken but complete mutual understanding between them, an understanding he himself did not share. Monk was now lapsing into depression more and more often. In Charlotte Zweren's film Straight No Chaser, Thelonious Jr. gives a frightening description of the bouts of depression in his life, which would regularly occur once or twice a year. Things that people would do to him, he would just internalize them, and they would manifest in tremendous fits of depression and euphoria, a very schizophrenic type of thing. And when this would happen, on certain occasions we had to hospitalize him. He would generally close up, introvert, and then he would get excited and may pace for 3 or 4 days, and eventually he would get exhausted. It was hard to say how it moved. It is a startling thing when you look your father in the eye and he doesn't know who you are. But my mother clearly let me know that it was our responsibility to look out for this guy the way he looked out for us every minute he was able. When he was okay, he was the self-sacrificing father with whom the children would lie in bed for hours at a time playing endless games of cards, or who would teach his son in the kitchen the tricks of playing basketball. It is difficult to credit this talent for sports to such a figure, but in fact it is interesting to note that Monk repeatedly won the New York Musicians Ping Pong Championship. In a different and happier respect, 1954 marked a turning point in Monk's life. He had once mentioned to his guest, Henri Renaud, that he was curious to know how jazz was received on the other side of the ocean. Renaud telephoned Charles Delaunay, and a place was found for Monk at the Parisian Salon du Jazz, 1954. There he played with European musicians who struggled with his music. In typical fashion, he had not rehearsed them. Even if he had, it probably would not have helped much. Monk had to appear with the star of French Dixieland, Claude Luther, at this time a regular pop idol but a very uncongenial partner. The concert was a failure. Nevertheless, the French jazz press honored him with many front covers and articles, and the French label Swing, later Vogue, made a solo record with him. This relaxed atmosphere resulted in one of Monk's most beautiful solo recordings, his wonderful music, one can perhaps detect the influence of the muse who would attend Monk to the end of his life and did much to help turn his life around. This was Baroness Panonica de Königswater. Panonica de Königswater was born into the English line of the Rothschild family and grew up in Paris attending a strict religious boarding school. Her lineage and education discouraged her from the traditional role of housewife. She learned to fly and married a fellow pilot, the French diplomat, and later resistance fighter Jules de Königswater. In World War II, she went on various missions for de Gaulle. Her brother served as Churchill's courier to the White House and used the opportunity to take lessons with Teddy Wilson. Panonica soon came to share her brother's enthusiasm for jazz. When her husband served in the French embassy in Mexico City, this dynamic, emancipated woman grew bored with her life there. In 1951, at the age of 37, she came to New York and established herself at the best address, renting a luxury suite in the Stanhope Hotel on Fifth Avenue. The suite soon became a private meeting place for the predominantly black musicians of the modern style. It functioned as a kind of unconventional counterpart to the literary salons of 18th century Europe. In May 1954, the Baroness, called Nika for short by musicians, flew to Paris and arrived just in time to attend the June 1st concert at which Monk appeared. She had wanted to introduce herself to Monk for some time. She recounts their first meeting in the film by Charlotte Zwerin. Thus, I didn't meet Monk until 54, she says in aristocratic British English. I took the plane to Paris just in time to see his first overseas concert. I went backstage afterwards and Mary Lou Williams introduced me to him. And the rest of the time he was there, we had a ball. Then I came back to New York a couple of months later. I was then living in the Stanhope, but after Bert died, in her apartment March 12, 1955, they threw me out. So I went to the Bolivar, and that's when I got my piano. And Thelonious and I got together. That's when he wrote Brilliant Corners and Baloo. Bolivar, Baloo's are. At night, we'd go out round to the clubs, and all the musicians would come back with us to the Bolivar, and we'd have these fantastic jam sessions till 8 or 9 in the morning. So, of course, eventually that caused trouble, and I was thrown out of there. And then we decided that I should get a house of my own. And I got this house overlooking the Hudson in Weehawken, New Jersey, around 1971. It is important to note that Monk's relations with the Baroness do not seem to have affected the deep mutual understanding that he enjoyed with Nellie. The trio of Monk's mother, and Nellie seems now to have evolved into the constellation Monk, Nellie, and Nika. In any case, Monk met this uniquely generous woman and patroness at a time when he and his family stood in especial need of material help and support. This support, together with the artistic self-consciousness awakened in him by his warm reception in Europe and the success of the Rags Groove recordings, may have made Monk all the more angry that Prestige had done so little for him, especially about getting his work permit back. On top of this, there was a dispute in March of 1955 marked clearly and decisively the end of an era. The age of classic bebop was over. In his biography of Parker Ross, Russell describes how shifts in public taste bring new styles to the forefront of a culture every 5 years. These are the years in which a new generation reaches maturity looking for new heroes. The attitude of the fan now was no longer typified by a cult of genius centered on an extravagantly large, living, self-destructive artist. It was more admiration for someone detached and self-possessed, master of both himself and his environment. Miles Davis, after kicking his heroin addiction, which was a relic of the Parker ethos, became the new star of modern jazz. No more were emotions flaunted with tearing, giddy, virtuosic lines. Now, instead, a minimum of emotion was conveyed through coolly restrained tones in a moderate tempo. The Miles Davis All-Star recordings on Bag's Group are an ideal example of the type. They illustrate another new trend in that Milt Jackson's playing, although it is virtuosic in the classic sense, demonstrates the earthy, arresting influence of gospel and the blues. This trend typifies hard bop and soul jazz, which were gaining popularity. The blending of gospel and blues with jazz introduced a quality described at the time as funky. A year later, Miles Davis in his first classic quintet would integrate his earlier cool manner with a new vigorous style to form a trend-setting synthesis. Horace Silver and Art Blakey were protagonists of the new style and achieved immediate success with it. The greatest success, however, was reserved for Davis himself, who imposed a surface of cool over a hard-bobbing rhythm section. Monk's piano playing could also be perceived as cool, intellectual, and funky. All at the same time, it remained oriented toward the melody and therefore easy to follow. In this respect, again, he was an anomaly in bebop. Since the Minton days, Monk had been an imposing figure. His size, over 6 feet tall and close to 200 pounds alone, won him respect, and he was not governed by a self-destructive inner demon like Powell or Parker. He simply filled the needs of his inner rhythm with self-discipline. His uncompromising individualism more and more fit the new public expectation of what a jazz star should be like. The parallel with Miles Davis in this respect is inevitable. It is significant that Davis's famous comeback at the Newport Festival in 1955 began with a standing ovation after a solo with a muted trumpet on Monk's Round Midnight. Monk, however, moreover, was presiding at the piano in this performance of the All-Star Group. At the beginning of 1955, however, this development was not yet clear. Please like and subscribe and catch